and welcome to episode 100 of the PowerScore LSAT podcast. I'm Dave Kaloran in Napa Valley.
And this is Jon Denning in Los Angeles.
Jon, welcome to the 100th episode. How do you feel about that?
If we had ever predicted that we'd get to episode 100 at the beginning of this thing, I'd have called us both crazy.
I would have said you're a liar. But here we are.
Here we are, the big triple digit.
Yes, and tonight we're going to talk about the state of the LSAT Union, which is something we now do annually. So we will be recapping the 2021 LSAT year and then taking a look ahead at 2022 and seeing what's going on, not only in the law school admissions world and the LSAT world, but also in the PowerScore world. But before any of that, let's get to what I clearly think is the most important topic of the evening. What are you drinking?
Yeah, this is the only thing that's made it to episode 100 for us, I think. Without cocktails, we'd have probably stopped at about episode 6. I am going with a bit of a callback, actually. I think this was the drink I had when we did last year's little retrospective, which is a glass, a very tall glass, of Macallan 12 nice scotch.
A tumbler.
Yeah. And this was actually a gift from a student, so it has a certain sentimental value to me.
And you've had it for a year? I'm in shock.
Oh, no, this is a more recent student.
Multiple students are gifting you with Macallan.
I think this student heard me say something on last year's podcast and tucked it away.
And now out there's a student thinking, I'll get Jon a bottle of Macallan.
Keep them coming. Yeah.
Yeah, I need to come up with something really expensive and be like, hey, that's what I like to drink.
To be fair, this was a tutoring student of mine who went from 152 to 179 in November. So I think I've earned the Macallan, Dave.
You've earned a case of Macallan.
I don't know about that. But it was a nice gift. It was very thoughtful. So she and I are both quite happy this holiday season.
Yes, you are.
Yeah, what are you drinking?
I'm actually going to go with the classic New Year's drink, which is champagne. I think that kind of goes for episode 100. It goes for New Year's. Obviously, I live in wine country, so we don't make champagne here. We make sparkling wine. Champagne has to come from a region in France, but one of my neighbors is actually French, and his family makes champagne. And so this is a bottle of Morlaix Grand Reserve Brut that comes from his family over in France. So it's kind of cool.
That sounds good to me.
I think he makes great wine.
We both found our lane here tonight in terms of cocktails.
Yeah, we're both true to our roots in this particular case. He actually makes great still wine. His red wines are fantastic in my opinion, but his family makes the champagne. So thought, all right, I got a bottle of it. Let's go with that tonight.
Morlaix. We'll see if we can link it into this if somebody wants to follow in your footsteps.
It's hard to get, unfortunately. But I have chosen the song for tonight. Yeah. You've never even heard this song.
I was going to say, speaking of hard to get, this is entirely lost on me.
I've been trying hard to work in some excellent K-pop referencing to this podcast and the musical slate, and I've largely been unsuccessful. And I usually would go for, female K-pop bands. That's kind of what I really like to listen to the most out of that genre. But there is a song that matches so perfectly with what we're doing, Jon, that I had to choose it. And the song is 100. Obviously, 100 episodes, 100. The band is Super M. It is a song that I hear in my household every at least day or two because my wife and daughter like to play it and dance around to it. So I often hear we go 100 around the house. So I thought this was perfect for us.
Well, thank you for doing all the heavy lifting on the music. I had nothing to offer.
Yeah, I mean, I hear a lot of BTS and stuff like that, so this is just right in that genre. This is the daily soundtrack around what happens with breakfast, lunch, and dinner.
Well, as long as it's not that terrible Mariah Carey Christmas song, I'm fine. That's the song I've been hearing all the time.
Yes, in fact, you were just in Nashville with the family. How was that?
Loud and sticky and very demanding. My little sister's got a 2.5-year-old and a 4-month-old, and my God, those kids have got some lungs on them.
Yeah, as they say in the South, bless her heart for being able to handle that.
She
sounds like a nightmare.
She got me off the grandkid hook for now, so at least there's that.
Yeah, well, hopefully she doesn't have a third lined up because 3 under the age of 5 is just a nightmare from what I've been able to observe.
Well, they say they're done, but you never know.
No one's ever really done until they are. I'm done, I can tell you that much for sure.
Good.
And on that auspicious note, let's move into the LSAT world. And let's start it off with a relatively big announcement I've been being asked about repeatedly. and that is the 2022 LSAT Bibles. When are they coming? Where are they? What's the release date? And I can give you all that information now. The release date is less than a week away. It is going to be January 1st. We'll make those available on our website, and that will be for all the LSAT Bibles. And we're going to put them on sale, kind of like as it's not a pre-sale gift, but as an opening sale gift. And they'll be about 35% off, if I recall the number that we were tossing around. So on January 1st, you'll be able to order those from our website. And then on the first shipping day, which is Monday, January 3rd, those will go out the door to you. And that'll be the latest, greatest edition. And maybe a little bit later, I'll post some information on some of the updates that we made and so forth.
Yeah, people always ask that question. What's changed? Dave's usually pretty good about a comprehensive overview. So,
yeah, my time's a little limited, so I probably won't be able to go into a big, long blog post about every change like I often try to do, but I'll at least give an update, and our staff will know what the update is as well.
Yeah, well, I know one thing that's occupying some of your time, because it's taken up some of mine as well, which is we're doing a crystal ball next week on January 4th. So that's next Tuesday night. If you want to come check that out, it's free to all. Anyone can sign up. You don't have to be a student of ours to attend. But you do have to be a student of ours if you want to check out the recording, and as we've done for the past few, if you want to get access to the recommended problem sets that we'll put together for people.
Yes, and I can tell everyone right now that we do have a very specific prediction as to which tests we think they're going to reuse. As many of you know, we've done this previously in our predictions and been right, certainly more often than not. Even when we were wrong, I think we were right. Which we talked about previously. I think
we've been right 3 tests in a row if you count the November makeup. Which
there
of course
is
I
that.
do.
The one that we weren't right about, I think they actually changed, but we talked about that in a prior podcast, so I won't beat that horse in this particular episode.
Yeah.
But yes, you're right, John. That has actually been taking up quite a bit of time for both of us as we prepare for that, make changes. And I think the problem set changes we're making are actually really useful too. Because once again, when we have a really strong feeling about what we think they're going to use, and again, they'll reuse a test in all likelihood that was previously used but not released, we can then build problem sets that don't have the specific content. It's not like it has the same games or reading comp, but it is modeled in the style and kind of like the focus. So if we thought there was a lot of grouping on the test that they were intending to use, we would tilt towards more grouping in our problem sets. And as a number of students from the last LSAT told me afterwards, they were ecstatic with how that worked out. So a pretty useful thing in general. And even if it was wrong, the beauty of it is the games that we're selecting are generally useful for many different tests. So you still would get value one way or the other. So hopefully you'll join us there.
Agreed. Yeah. Join us there and for some other free webinars that are coming up. I think there's one the very next night, in fact, on basic conditional reasoning. So whether you're just starting out or you're just still struggling with conditionality, that's a very, very useful discussion. And then there's one a little later in January on advanced conditional reasoning, kind of building on the back of it. So yeah, we'll link to our free seminars page. But go check them out. Sign up for all of them, frankly.
Yeah, the basic one is on January 5th, the night after the Crystal Ball, and then the advanced one is on January 18th, so less than 2 weeks later. Gives you kind of like, as you can see, a basic and then advanced look at really one of the biggest concepts on this test, conditional reasoning. The other change that we saw was that LSAC decided they just wanted to extend that February LSAT registration deadline, so they have pushed that back to January 5th, so if you're still thinking about the February LSAT, you've got some time still. You've got all the way until after the Crystal Ball. So you could even sit through that and think to yourself, does this sound like an exam I want to take? And then turn around and make that decision the next day.
Yeah, to your point, we'll focus on the January test in that Crystal Ball. But we expect it's going to apply to the February test as well. So it'll be really relevant for people who then have about 24 hours to get signed up for Feb.
That's exactly the case. And with that note, John, we've now wrapped up the basics of the LSAT world, which takes us into the main event for tonight, which is really kind of like a 2021 recap. See where we were. And I can tell you from having gone back and listened to parts of the 2020 recap that I don't know that this is as eventful a year in the LSAT world. But it still was eventful.
Yeah. It does feel like it was about 30 months long. But as we'll see, last year, 2020, there were so many changes with the emergence of the pandemic. You know, the first administration of the flex, changes to how they were going to do testing limits. You can go back and listen to our recap of 2020 from an earlier episode if you want. But it was jam-packed with just one update after another, one sort of breaking news event after another. This year was a little more steady, at least.
Yeah, there were some test changes and certainly some admission cycle elements, but instead of kind of describing it broadly, let's just dive into it and kind of see what we had. Because if you go back a year and you think about the start of 2021, we'd kind of settled into a more stable pattern. The flex was something that everybody was familiar with. They were, coming up on a regular basis. People knew how the test was going to be administered. They knew they were going to be dealing with ProctorU. The thing that we were dealing with probably most importantly as the year turned was the fact that we were seeing all sorts of bad signs in January about the LSAT scoring bubble. Mm-hmm. Something that we talked about, as it turned out, continuously last year, because that scoring bubble was really significant. And it had long-term effects over the cycle because it had such a huge number of people in the higher scoring ranges that it caused all sorts of confusion, not only for applicants who had no idea whether or not their scores were good enough for schools, but also for schools who didn't really know whether or not they should accept the standard applicants they had in the past. And so as we hit January and started 2021 off, what you were seeing was a real slowdown. People were starting to complain, I expected a decision by now, and that wasn't happening. And so all that confusion on both sides of the admissions aisle had created a scenario where the law school said, we need to slow down and figure out what we're actually seeing. And LSAC at this time was giving guidance out that, oh no, it's not really a scoring bubble, it's going to disappear. And John, you and I, notably, as well as one or two other kind of organizations doing this, made a lot of noises that, well, we don't know if that's the case. And as we've said elsewhere, we turned out to be right. So it was something that we were hopeful that LSAC was right about, but they weren't. And the scoring bubble was really starting to hit, and people were beginning to realize this is going to change my outcomes.
Yeah, we had seen the bubble grow through the fall and winter of 2020, but we weren't entirely sure what was going to happen in terms of the cycle itself, what schools were going to do in response to it, whether LSAC might actually prove right with their prediction that it was going to dissipate. And so we kept a really close eye on both the January and the February flex LSAT tests this year, just to see. Let's see if LSAC's predictions hold true, if this bubble does begin to shrink. And it did not. As we saw.
It got worse.
Yeah. So mid-January was the first flex test of the year, January 16th. It got worse. We waited for February. February 20th was the second test of the year. It got worse again, if I recall.
Yeah, and by the time we hit March, you could see the insane effects of this cycle. One of the tweets that I posted last year on my Twitter account was that in 2019, there were 4,375 seats in the T14. And this year, there's about 5,575 scores in the 170 to 180 range. And so that's ridiculous. There's more scores in the 170s than there are available seats at the top schools.
1,200 more scores.
I mean, that's just out of control. If you narrow it down to the T6, there were 1,900 seats in the prior year. And then in 2021, the early part of it, there were 1,440 scores just in the 175 to 180 range. That's, 3/4 of the seats could be taken up by people with 175s or above. And so somebody who's gone out and gotten a 168, a great score, all of a sudden they're looking up at that mountain and it looks like Everest. Feels like it's going to take a real long shot. And that's one of the outcomes we eventually saw, was that the medians for law schools rose anywhere from 1 to 3 points at most schools. That was a direct result of this scoring bubble and all this uncertainty that was floating around. That's rough.
Yeah, we've talked a lot about what caused the scoring bubble, so I won't get into any kind of in-depth recap here. But it was certainly a combination of the flex test probably being miscalibrated a little bit, whether in terms of the conversion or just what was going to happen with a shorter test, ease of taking it at home, and of course, with people stuck at home. Everybody has more time to study. And so you had this just confluence of factors, this perfect storm, basically, to create these high scores.
And the reason that argument was important was it wasn't that people didn't think that there were various causes. Depending upon the cause, you could make the argument that the bubble would go away or not.
Right.
And that was where the problem was, is what's the long-term effect of this? And if it is that the test structure itself, which is now, fundamentally different, has a flaw to it, that's not changing. It doesn't matter if people are studying more or not, it's going to have an effect.
Yeah, which is why we harped on it a little bit, is because that was LSAC's explanation. It's not the test is fine, it's perfect. It's just people's schedules, basically.
Yeah, I think I just rolled my eyes, and I did then, and I do now. Because I hear that explanation, I'm like, yeah. Partial.
Pretty flimsy.
Certainly, to say that that's the 100% ignores what I felt was the reality, and I think we were vindicated later on, and others were not. But that rolled into further effects, because when we got into the middle of April and we saw those deposit deadlines, if you were in last year's cycle, you saw something that had never happened before, and that was a school, specifically Notre Dame, who had already accepted a bunch of people, sent out a notice early in the day saying, hey, we're going to close deposits pretty soon. And then within like an hour or two, as people rushed to deposit there, they closed it, and they did something I've never seen before, and I know a lot of admissions professionals had never seen before. Even for students who had been accepted, they then took them off the acceptance list and put them into the wait list. Can you imagine that? You're sitting there and you're like, okay, I have until April 15th to decide whether or not I want to put down a deposit at Notre Dame. And then a day or two before that deadline, you don't see the email. And then you get a message from Notre Dame saying, well, you didn't deposit and we've closed up. Sorry.
Yeah, you didn't deposit by this date that we just moved up from what we had officially said we would allow.
It's just weird. It's like having a reservation at a restaurant and it's at 7 o'clock, and there you are at like 5:30 or 6 getting ready to go, and they call you up and they'll be like, hey, sorry, we just sold out your reservation spot. You didn't show up early.
You're not here yet, so we gave your table away.
I wasn't supposed to show up till 7. Yeah, but we wanted you to just show up at 5, and you didn't. But I didn't know. It's stupid. It's ludicrous. Notre Dame, I think, should live in infamy for that kind of pathetic, ridiculous circus that they put everybody through.
The good news about that, I suppose, if there's a silver lining here, is it did create enough bad publicity that I think it probably chastened other schools who might have been inclined to behave similarly.
Yeah, I'm sure Notre Dame would turn around and be like, this wasn't our fault. We had a much higher yield than we expected. We had to do this to protect, the viability of our school and being able to handle that type of enrollment. I'm like, well, A, be better at your jobs and understand what's happening. Don't send out kind of like emails like that cause a panic, and then some people get lucky from having seen their email. And other people were putting together their financials, and they're like, I don't have the extra money to just give on the 10th. I'm planning to have that where I get my paycheck and what have you. It was just a charade overall.
But yeah, that took us through the first 4 months or so of the year. And again, still in the meat of this scoring bubble, the grinder of it really, where schools were still slow. Responses weren't very forthcoming. People weren't getting the acceptances or the denials, frankly. So there were a lot of people just left in this strange purgatory, this limbo of application uncertainty. And it was tense, man. I remember talking to student after student who's like, what do I do? And the only real answer was you just wait.
Yes, a lot of tense direct messages. And unfortunately, not much we could do other than to say, wait, send them a message, give them a letter of continuing interest. But, all my friends have heard. And I'm like, right, but this isn't a normal year. Doesn't matter what happened to other people. It's all about what happened to you. But in the background, these LSATs kept going on. There was that January and February flex. There was an April flex test. And then there was a June flex test, which, John, if you may recall, that was a test where we actually predicted the exam that they would reuse, which was great for us.
Yeah.
Obviously, we're going to pat ourselves in the back 100 times because we're the only ones that have ever done it. I don't think anyone else will do it. I don't think they'll even try. But the cool thing for us was that was the last flex test of all time, and we got it right. So I felt great about that because we had the idea coming that there was going to be some changes to the LSAT in August. They were going to namely add an experimental. So we'll get to that in just a moment. But in the interim between that June flex and then the August kind of like new LSAT, what we
LSAT,
called the 3+1. We put out our logical reasoning Bible course and added it on top of our analytics system. And if you haven't taken that course yet, or if you haven't used it, the reviews that we get on that are fantastic. The feedback is really positive. And I'm really looking forward to adding more to that course too, especially as we finish the games and reading comprehension sections here in the upcoming year.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll talk a little more about those too. Additional courses coming out near the end of this, I imagine. So we do maybe a look ahead. But yeah, that's what we were working on through the first half of 2021 while all of this other madness with the cycle was going on. So it was quite a juggling act, frankly.
Yeah. We'd been recording that for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're not familiar with what that course is, it's essentially a series of short videos on questions and concepts. Everything reduced down to a bite size, kind of do it in whatever order you want. So if you feel like, hey, I just really need to focus on conditional reasoning, you can go into those sections and do just that. You can go to causality, you can go talk about whatever it is that you'd like, and then view it repeatedly. So it's kind of a cool course. I really like the design of it.
Yeah, built around, I'd say, the architecture, the structure of the logical reasoning Bible, hence the name.
Yeah, and then kind of joined to our analytics system, which is going to get expanded in the coming months as well. So I think it'll turn into something that becomes more and more robust as we add these pieces. But again, we'll kick that down the line and maybe mention it towards the end of this episode.
Yeah, so LSAC at this point has announced that June is going to be the last of the flex tests. And at that point, we had to start looking ahead to August, the next LSAT, to see exactly what changes were in effect, what was going to happen, and obviously make some predictions, as we tend to do, about what that might mean for test takers, for applicants, for us across the board. So what happened in August?
Well, they came out with their new LSAT. And so if you think about what were the changes, well, the significant change was they added a fourth section that was unscored. So you went from 3 sections being taken at home to 4 sections being taken at home. On top of that, because they now had 4 sections and they knew they needed to give people a break, they actually added a break between sections 2 and 3. That was essentially a 10-minute period. So you had a longer test now, and previously we knew all the content in any given flex test was scored. It was all real. Now we didn't have that. So there was definitely confusion after some of these tests as I watched people try to figure out what was my experimental. And it's not the same section for everybody. And it's not always games.
Mm-hmm.
You can get any one of the 3 types as an experimental, and it can appear anywhere in the stream of the 4 sections, first, second, third, or even fourth. So that caused some confusion as people kind of like worked through that. But I think we were able to navigate that pretty well. And obviously, we recap all these tests when we feel like we've got a pretty good handle on it. And so far, I think we have felt that way.
Yeah, I'll be honest, and you know this already. I was really, really wary of our ability to track this stuff. It's hard enough with just the flex where everything counts, but they have multiple forms and multiple combinations going on. That was tough. Now having, again, multiple forms, multiple combinations, and the addition of almost randomized unscored sections, I had less than high confidence that we were going to be able to keep tabs on this stuff. But it turns out we actually were able to, and that's in large part due to students being very generous with their time and within the rules, being generous with what they were able to share with us.
Yeah, we've seen this now, and LSAC has become quite clear. A week after the test, they don't really even care. They're happy to have people talk about it. And even during the test, people saying things like, well, I had a section of reading comp on this broad topic, and that broad topic. That doesn't seem to cause too many issues. They have started to police it a little bit more, but I notice their policing is, again, as usual, when people get overly specific about answer choices, rules, especially when they're trying to figure out the experimental too much and kind of like, I don't know, wheedling people for information. That's where I see LSAC getting a little irritated with it.
Yeah, understandably, frankly. I don't always agree with their policies, but that one makes some sense to me. I'll make one other slightly foreshadowing comment about that August exam, which is of the 3, August included, that the year was going to finish off with, I think August was probably the smoothest one, despite it being the first of this new type. Which, again, not what I would have expected at all, but that's what we got.
Yeah, that's not me chuckling there isn't out of satisfaction. It's kind of a wistful, sarcastic. Yeah, the first of the new 3+1 test formats was probably the best because the next two, which we'll get to momentarily,
Yeah.
were not very good. But the interesting thing was, as August came out and the results showed up, LSAC started posting guidance again that showed some interesting things. I mean, they made a very strong claim that the experimental section, according to their research, had no effect. So adding an extra section that was uncertain as to what it would be and that was ultimately unscored, according to their statistics, had no effect. And I've always said to myself, I'd really like to see that research because on the face of it, it's hard to buy that.
Yeah, and even if they want to make that claim on the whole, no universal effect, we know that individually it can have a massive effect. If you have an experimental reading comp versus experimental games, for instance, if your worst section turns out to be your experimental, or if by worst, I mean the one you tend to struggle with the most, if the worst section you have that day turns out to be experimental, it can ruin your entire mentality for the rest of the test. If I start with some really hard set of games and just can't quite get my way through it in the way that I'd normally expect, that's hard to recover from, even with the caveat that it may not count. So, for sure, on an individual level, the experimental had a massive effect for certain people.
Yeah, and you and I have talked to enough students over the years to know that. To us, it's an undeniable effect and not even something that you could dispute is true. It's just there. Now, to say that the individual experiences don't turn out to wash each other out and counterbalance and have a zero net effect overall, that's harder for us to say without having the data. But if we already know that at least on an individual level that it's affecting a number of people, it sure makes you look at the claim that it doesn't have any effect overall and think, really? Are you sure? How are we measuring this? What are we looking at? Which students are we talking about? I'd like to see that, but they won't release that information. And I don't think it's because they're hiding anything. That's just the point where too much data starts to compromise the overall integrity of the test. So if somebody's like, those guys are hiding something, that's not actually how I look at it. I'm like, they don't want to share that because they've never been that specific about that information, because that might help someone figure out what they're doing. You might be able to see that, well, this section is the experimental this percentage of time, and they only do this other section, this percentage. They don't want you to have that information, and I completely support that.
Yeah, that's fine. But I will say, we just highlighted some very specific scenarios where it could have a detrimental effect. So for them to claim some net neutral, it means there must be a counterbalance on the other side where the experimental has had some beneficial effect for a significant number of people. And I'll be honest with you, Dave, those are harder scenarios for me to come up with.
Well, I mean, look, when you're taking an LSAT, doing more questions doesn't seem to be a net positive for anybody. So, I mean, fundamentally, I'm like, you added, roughly 25 questions. Was that really good for anybody?
Yeah.
Because that's kind of what the claim is in a very grand sense. And I'm like, I don't know if I'm buying that. So I'll just let it go.
Maybe the 10-minute break was worth it. Maybe people with an experimental first got a little bit of a free warm-up, or experimental last got to, fade out early. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I don't know, but then that's offset by the people with it at sections 2 and 3 that got drained and dragged down by it. I don't know. Every time you give me a positive, I can at least see the offsetting negative. Maybe that's their argument.
I can name 2 negatives for every positive, I think. So the math there is tricky for me to compute.
Yeah, that's exactly the case. Anyway, that was their guidance, that the experimental had no effect. But one of the things we did see is that we still had a scoring bubble. And this is something that we've talked about on prior episodes, something that anybody who follows me on Twitter has seen me tweet about. I'll probably tweet about it tomorrow as well and give a further update. We have less of a bubble than we had previously, but we still have a bubble. And that's what we saw back in September was their guidance came out and gave us that information. And the reason it came out in September is that's when they start updating for the new cycle. So there's about a month to 6 weeks where they go silent because one cycle is ended and there really is no data on the new cycle. Then all of a sudden the daily reports begin again. We get to see what's actually happening. And the last time I checked it, it was something along the lines of if you had 100 people 2 years ago, then last year you had 200 plus people like in a certain scoring range, say the 170s. And this year you're down to like 165, which sounds great, and it is. But 2 years ago it was 100. Now it's 165. So there still is a bubble there.
Yeah, I think the last time we talked about that, I mentioned the idea that it's all about frame of reference. You can turn statistics based on comparisons into just about anything you want them to be.
Oh, yeah. Scores in the 175 to 180 range are down 20%. Wow.
Yeah, just cherry pick your year.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Everybody's happy. Oh, wait, last year was up over 100% on the prior year? Uh-oh, that's bad news. Then the 20% drop doesn't offset the 100% gain. It goes a ways towards it, but you need to get down at least to 50% to start seeing kind of like offsetting effects.
Yeah, we'll probably make mention of this here towards the end, but you're paving a nice little runway into the next episode we're going to do, the first of the new year, where we're going to talk a lot more about the cycle itself.
So let's move on, because about a week after that information came out, LSAC did something that, John, I know you and I didn't expect to see happen. Mm-hmm. What was that?
They released, well, they called it 3 new tests, but they released 2 brand new tests, 91 plus and 92 plus, 3 sections plus an experimental for each of those. And they repackaged the May 2020 test, which was already available, with an experimental section of its own and called it PT 90 plus. So in a sense, we got, I'm doing air quotes around the number, but we got 3 new LSATs in mid-September.
But what we got was really 9.
We got 9 new sections, yeah.
By the way, that's a lot for any test prep company to deal with. I'm fortunate to have friends at a lot of different companies, and I talked to a few of them, and they were all upset because they were like, yeah, 9's tough. You know, I can do 3 or 4 sections and deal with it, but 9, that's a lot of work. So everybody was grumpy about that. And also, you know, sometimes I think about what happens in 5 or 10 years when people look back on this era. You know, prep test 1 through 89, fine. 90 plus, 91 plus. What's the plus mean? It's just ridiculous. Now they're releasing tests with experimentals. They didn't do that before. It's going to look weird in the kind of like the notational nomenclature sense in years future.
Yeah, there's just going to be a giant asterisk around this entire timeline in our history, I think. As a species, but certainly as a test prep group.
Yeah, for both LSAT and for everything. So we got those new tests, which was great, though, because you want new tests. Somebody asked me the other day on Twitter, you think they're going to release any new tests before the January LSAT? And my instant response was 0 chance. I said very unlikely, but what I meant was 0 by that, because I'm like, no, they just released 9 sections several months ago. We're not going to see any sections, I think, for another year, and then we'll have to figure it out.
Yeah, I think if anything new is forthcoming, it's probably this fall 2022.
Yeah, and we move into the fall here because we get to October, and this is where the October LSAT comes into play. And then you kind of did a little bit of foreshadowing with this. This was a disastrous test overall, probably one of the worst LSAT administrations in history. And what was the reason? Well, we recapped it in our podcast from that era back then, but on Saturday morning, there was a server issue of some sort that froze hundreds, if not thousands of people mid-test and kicked them out, and then stopped a very large number of people from starting their test on time. A massive wave of confusion. And I think something like 2,000 people less than expected ended up taking the test on that Saturday. They did reschedule them, and we knew that they would, but some people weren't able to take the rescheduling and were pushed onto the test afterwards. It was just hugely upsetting. I don't think this one was LSAC's fault in a direct sense. I think this was an internet architecture problem, but I don't know the exact specifics of it. But again, this is the kind of thing in high-stakes testing, you don't want to see anybody have a problem, and then you don't want to see a large-scale outage this way. This was a massive disaster for them.
Yeah, it was a couple hours where no one could test, where anyone mid-test was booted. I talked to a couple people who were like near the end of their last section and it crashed. And of course, when that happens, you don't get to just pick up where you left off, unless you can get right back in the room quickly. If you have to do a makeup test, you start over. And you start over with a brand new exam. So this was true disaster for thousands of people.
Yay, yes. And that's, again, a sarcastic yay.
No, it's true disaster for us, too, because all we wanted to do was try to track the test that day. And instead what we tracked were just meltdowns of people trying to finish who couldn't.
Yeah, it was pretty horrible, and made for a really rough weekend. And of course, there wasn't a whole lot of communication from LSAC about what was happening. LSAC just sat back and was like, "Oh, we're trying to figure it out." And so I was talking to just tons of people at that point and posting updates because there was just total uncertainty. And sometimes it was a guess. Like I didn't know for sure they were going to reschedule people, but I was almost certain they would because this wasn't something affecting 10 or 20 or 30 people. This was hundreds at a minimum. And I'm pretty sure, ultimately thousands. So we could make some pretty logical guesses about what happened. And thankfully, they did do their best. They added test days. They opened up different windows for people to take exams. So they knew there was a problem. They worked to fix it. But the problem with this is it's never an easy fix. It's always that they have to figure out who took what test and what test they can then give them. And it's not just a simple, just have them all do this. That's where all the time comes in. And I've noticed that when they have these uncertainties, their response is not to come out and say, hey, we're working on it. There's a lot of problems with like rescheduling people because we have to match people to the right test. They just go silent. Like they don't want to make a mistake that further amplifies it. And if I recall, there was an email that came out the next day that did further amplify because it had wrong information in it. It didn't go to everybody or went to some of the wrong people. So, even then there were issues. That was a bad administration, John.
Yeah, that's one of the worst I've seen in, as long as I can remember, frankly. And there's one other point, I think, relevant to the one you just made, although I hope never relevant again, which is that the customer service staff at LSAC, despite what I think are their best efforts, are often left largely in the dark when things happen here. Even the internal communication doesn't seem to always be great. So just words of the wise for people in the future who might face something similar, God forbid, is the things that they tell you immediately on the phone, that sort of first responder answer that you get, it may not be accurate or at least entirely accurate. And Dave, I think that's why your Twitter proved to be almost like ground zero for good data that day, is because you were the one telling people what was realistic. People on the phone were saying, well, sorry, if you can't take it on the actual scheduled makeup day next Thursday, will you wait till November? We'll give you a refund. It's like, I know I'll get a refund. I couldn't even get in. But this is not helpful, and surely this can't be the full solution. And it wasn't, but it was the first response. So just, again, grain of salt when you talk to people there in the aftermath of some disaster like this. Know that what you get may not be fully accurate or at all accurate.
Yeah, actually, I have sympathy for the people answering the phones when something like this happens because they clearly haven't been given the updated information. And there was more than one occasion where someone on Twitter was, are you telling me not to believe what they said? And I was like, yeah, I am telling you that. I'm like, you got to be very circumspect about figuring this out. And a lot of times they don't know a whole lot more than you because it's happening to them in real time. And the phones just explode. And they're like, what? Well, they know that a makeup is scheduled for like Thursday, a week and a half later. So they're like, well, the makeup's this date. So if you can't take it then, you're going to have to kick into the next one because that's normally the policy. But in the midst of a massive tidal wave of problems, you have to realize that the administration will they'll make moves that are bigger than just saying everybody takes it on the retake day. And that's the difference between being an observer from outside who understands kind of some of the things that they want to do and really what their goals are in terms of trying to, get people to take the test. I knew the people on the phones couldn't see that. They weren't paying attention. They weren't out there talking to students other than the people who were calling in. And that's just a very serial, linear type of environment where it's one student has a problem, another student has a problem. They're not realizing that there are hundreds of people who are suffering at that moment.
Yeah, I'm sympathetic towards them too. I mean, they're just conduits of information. They don't actually get to make policy decisions. So when they don't have information to relay, or when all they've been told is business as usual, that's kind of what they're beholden to, despite the fact that it's not going to stay true. I feel the same way for them sometimes that I do about like people who work in the lost luggage department for an airline. It's like, do you ever get a happy phone call? I don't know what they pay you, but it's not enough.
I was going to analogize it to waiters and waitresses at a restaurant. I must be hungry because there's a lot of restaurant analogies. It's kind of like the waiter who brings you a meal and it turns out the meal's terrible. They're just the avenue for telling you and dealing with it. They're not the person who actually caused the screw up. They don't have any of the answers. They can't remake the steak or whatever it is that was a problem. So,
But of course, the impulse, especially in high anxiety, is to shoot the messenger. So that's exactly what you get here: is people furious at the person on the phone, and it's like they didn't do this to you.
yeah, so that whole situation then played out over the next 2 weeks. So that was October 9th that it started, and over the next 2 weeks, it kind of went through. So that we were very busy during that period. It was also a period of time where we made an agreement with our friends over at Barbary and linked up with them to kind of obtain some more resources and to kind of move forward. And if you're not familiar with Barbary, they do bar preparation, primarily, I'd say the biggest bar prep company in the United States by far.
Mm-hmm.
And we've had a relationship with them for years. And so one of the nice things about that is we were working on that, and that'll bring a lot of resources to PowerScore students in this year. Going to bring forward some more information for them about law school and being a 1L and so forth. So we were juggling a lot during that particular time.
Yeah, but that's exciting. Some of it was terrible. Some of it's very exciting. The Barbary stuff's exciting. That test was terrible.
The testing stuff, terrible.
Yeah.
Getting resources for Barbie, that was cool.
Yeah.
And then we move into the next month, and we get to November, and here we come in with the November 13th LSAT and starting off. And this was an interesting exam, again, because we predicted this one as well. We had a strong feeling about which one they would use, especially after October, because we think that they kind of like did a flip-flop in October because they saw our crystal ball. Which is why we've moved our crystal balls back a little bit to give them less of a runway to make changes on us. But that November one, John, you nailed that one. And that was pretty good. You also nailed the retake test for the November LSAT as well. So that's pretty impressive. Not only the test they would use during the exam, but then the retake test that they would focus on.
Thanks. Yeah, it was a good couple of weeks for me. Unfortunately, it wasn't a good couple of weeks for everyone.
Yes. What was the problem there?
This was a different tech issue, but another tech disaster of sorts. This was a case where just hundreds, perhaps again thousands of people had an issue that while they were testing, a pop-up, I think from ProctorU, continued to just populate their screen, had to be manually dismissed about connectivity issues and various things that weren't a problem, but apparently the system was registering as a problem. And so you're sitting there trying to read a passage and a pop-up keeps showing up, sometimes 20, 30 times in a section.
Yeah, let's isolate that for a second, because imagine you're on your computer and you get a pop-up. Your first reaction is to swear and then to kill it, because it's aggravating. You're like, come on, I was doing something else here. Get out of my face. And imagine that keeps happening over and over. And you're just on a computer. You're trying to read an article. It's a BuzzFeed article, and you're trying to entertain yourself. But it keeps happening over and over again. You're mad. You're furious. Now take that exact same situation, and it's not BuzzFeed that you're reading or some news article or what have you. It's the LSAT, and it's the test that is going to have a massive, probably the primary impact on where you end up at law school. And there's this stupid pop-up coming in. You would probably, I'm pretty sure I would have smashed the screen, thrown stuff out windows.
Yeah, I don't think I wouldn't have reacted too calmly to that either. Because all the while, you're having to manually dismiss this thing. It's completely disruptive. It covers the portion of the screen that you're looking at, and the clock keeps running. Yeah. It's not like the system paused when this happened. It's just you had to pause.
Yeah, no one's timing you when you read BuzzFeed.
No. So, and again, this happened for days to people. And once again, Dave, you saint, on the front lines, trying to figure out with people, even through like Reddit polling and things that you did, what was the combination perhaps of machine and operating system and even browser that might have been causing this? Is there a safer combo that people could opt to that might, that might lessen the odds of this pop-up thing? And I think we actually figured out some solutions for people.
We did. Yeah. We were actually able to shift people to a better browser that had fewer problems. And I think it had like 90% fewer problems. And at one point, I was talking to someone at LSAC, and they're like, we think it's on both of them. And I was like, well, this information that I'm seeing when I'm actually polling people doesn't suggest that at all. One of the browsers is having way more problems than this other one. And the response was, okay. Like, they were confused too. And I understand. It was kind of like, well, this never happened before and we didn't change anything. And that's the kind of thing in the internet that's really tough. I don't know this for sure, but it was some third party that had changed something, and that created like these kind of like ad-like pop-ups. And so neither LSAC or ProctorU had changed anything systemically. It was somebody else that changed something, and it kind of like propagated downstream and affected them. And it's like, man, there's no way to anticipate some of these things. But at the same time, you're getting a lot of money from each student to anticipate these things and to test it out and to know. So as much as I'm understanding of why the problem happened, I'm not forgiving of why it happened.
Yeah, and to fix it quickly, frankly. I mean, that's part of what's being paid for here is actual tech support, tech resolutions. I know there are people listening to this right now who are like, tell us the browsers. So I will. Chrome at that point in time, and again, this has been fixed, so I don't think this applies to the future, but Chrome was the browser causing the problems. Firefox was the recommended browser that didn't seem to face them.
Yeah, and I think going forward, this is like one of those identified problems. We've seen it, now we know what it is, we fixed it, they put a patch in, and that problem went away as the week went on. Incredibly annoying though. Early students were like, I couldn't do my test. It was impossible. I lost minute after minute as I just clicked out of these pop-ups. And some people had tons of them. Some people had a few. Some people had none. It was almost like this weird roulette of browser and timing and all this kind of stuff. And it's not the LSAT casino I want to be in.
No, that's more Russian roulette. Is what that felt like.
Excellent. So, we felt good about predicting the exams, but we felt bad about the number of people who had to take, retakes and everything like that.
Because, the pop-up people, a strange group, but those people actually were offered retakes as well, a makeup exam. And that's great that there's that safety net of sorts. But for the safety net to matter, it means you had to fall off the trapeze or something. That's not the situation you want to be in.
Yeah, circus performers don't want to be using the safety net.
Right. They're happy it's there, but they don't want it.
Yeah, it saves them from death typically, but they don't want to be falling towards it. They know that that's a failure, and this was a failure in terms of, providing the test for people. Anyway, that was the November LSAT, which was the last LSAT of the year. So one of the things we've seen here in December has been relatively calm. No December LSAT. We're still talking about the bubble, and that's something we'll talk about more in our next episode, which is going to be a mid-cycle recap. But smaller bubble, but still extant. And that reaches the end of the year at this point, John. That's 2021.
There you go. Almost the end of the year. I got 2 more days to go. I've gone a COVID-free 2021.
As have I.
Let's see if I can make it.
I'm pleased about that. You only have 2 more days. You need to figure it out. I will say this, I'm getting antsy to get out and travel, and you've had some travel and you've been able to dodge the bullets out there, but
yeah, I scratched that itch a bit. I'm sure you're dying.
No, it's killing me because I love to travel and I'm just simply not hardly out at all. Anyway, let's move on to 2022 and talk a little bit about what we think we're going to see there. The first thing is the LSAT. Do we think the LSAT's going to change? No. I think it's going to be the same 3+1 format. It's still digital at home. Is it possible they allow in-person testing? It's possible. Do I think it's likely? No. I believe the LSAT format that we're looking at is the LSAT format that we have for at least the next 2 years. And that means that those of you who are thinking, well, aren't they possibly going to remove logic games down the line? They're certainly talking about it, and there's been a lot of discussion and focus on that. They're not going anywhere this year. They're not going anywhere next year. So if you want to go to law school anytime in the next 2 years, really 3 years, you're going to deal with logic games. I will give a slight update on LSAT dates because we know that we have LSAT dates through June of 2022. And one of the most common questions I'm getting, and I'll tweet it tomorrow, really the day this comes out, is when are we going to get the rest of our LSAT dates? And I wish I could tell you that it was right now or I had them in my pocket. I think it's going to be a couple more weeks, unfortunately. I think they're going to probably pull it towards the end of January. And that doesn't make anybody happy, least of all me, because I want to be able to plan and schedule over the course of a year. But that's kind of the intel I'm getting. Don't think we're going to see them anytime soon. We'll talk about that on our next episode, too.
I thought you were going to say you had them. I actually scooted forward in my seat.
Let me just say that reveal. As we've been recording this, I have actually been texting with one of my LSAC contacts, who's a great person, super helpful. And they're like, I don't think so. And I was like, well, that's, at least that's breaking news up to the minute. It's going to be a while longer, which I didn't think we were going to get them the week between Christmas and New Year's. but I was hoping maybe the first week or so of January, but apparently those hopes have been dashed as well.
Well, what are you going to do? Christmas is over, Dave.
Clearly, all holidays are over except for New Year's at this point. Doesn't matter what you celebrate or observe, they're all ending.
To your point about the consistency of both the administration and the structure format of the test, I can confidently say, at least through June, I don't expect any changes. They wouldn't let people sign up for tests at this point, I don't think, that they knew were going to be different. So if you're looking at a test in the next 6-7 months, you're for sure safe, but I actually agree with you about the rest of it, the longer time frame of this. I don't think they're going to change anything for a while.
Yeah, when you and I hadn't seen any test dates released, we did have a debate. It's like, is it possible they're thinking about making a change? And I will just say for the record, I don't think they are. I'm not expecting to hear about a new July or August LSAT, August most likely. That is now a different format. I think we're now dealing with the LSAT as it will be for the next several years. So we just have to kind of like say this is it and move forward. So anything's possible. I would say it would be a big surprise to me personally if they made any further changes.
Yeah, same here.
Well, how about that admissions cycle? This is what we're going to talk about in our next episode. So I'm not going to go too far into detail on this, but as we've said previously, this is still a very competitive cycle. It's less competitive than last year, but it is most definitely more competitive than, say, 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago. So that's making things a little bit more challenging. It's slowing down the cycle. It's not getting as many responses to students. Things are taking more time to get out there right now. And that's kind of like the snake bit from last year.
Mm-hmm.
If you're a law school, you're like, I'm not going to rush on anything because last year was a disaster. I need to make sure we don't have the same type of disaster.
Yeah, and so same advice that we gave people last year holds now. Be patient, keep an eye on things, but definitely don't expect the trends and tendencies and time frames of, say, 2 to 3 years ago to apply this year. We haven't immediately reverted back to pre-2020.
No, I'm seeing some good results from students. I've got a few students that I keep in touch with who are like, I'm getting good answers. I'm not seeing a tremendous amount of movement in the top 6 yet, but certainly in the lower half of the T14 and the T25 itself, I'm seeing responses coming in. So that's at least good. There is movement. It's just not massive and fast the way you'd really like to see, where people can get an early answer and just move on from there.
Yeah. And what else? I guess while we're looking ahead to 2022, it can't hurt to reiterate that we do have this crystal ball next Tuesday night. Please join us. They're always fun, and we have an open Q&A at the end as well, so even if you're like, I don't know if I need the predictions, come ask some questions. Bug Dave. He loves it.
Yeah, even if you're not taking the LSAT, I answer questions about the LSAT, law school admissions. Yeah, and I like to be bugged about it, so I'll certainly do my best. I just scan the questions, and especially the ones I see coming up a lot or, multiple people. I try to answer those and kind of run it down. So it ends up sometimes being very basic, sometimes really advanced. A lot of times it's all levels of information. But that's really one of the first events that we have. And when we look at, PowerScore plans in 2022, I think there'll be a lot of things that we're doing. Like I said earlier, the LSAT Bibles are being released on January 1st. And 3 days later, we've got the crystal ball that's coming through. We'll see about other crystal balls for future tests. We always have to see what happens with each test. We wait for a change in information in order to trigger whether or not we'll do one. But keep this in mind. There are LSATs in January, February, March, and April. It is a fast start to the year. It's going to be a very crowded calendar. So it's going to feel like, didn't we just do this? Because I'm already feeling it looking at the calendar. I know when we're in the midst of it, I'm going to be like, we just had this happen. How's it coming up again?
Yeah, hearing you rattle off 4 months in a row, I just reached for this bottle of Macallan.
You're like, Macallan 12. I need a Macallan 100.
Yeah, it's going to be a punishing few months. It's funny you mentioned that, though, about future crystal balls. I was thinking that originally we hadn't planned to do one for October of last year, but then in September we got 9 new sections. That right away tipped the scales to where we had to talk about it. It gave us enough content that a new one made sense. If something happens in January, we'll do a new one for February. If something happens in February, we'll do a new one for March. So it's too early to predict when we'll do more, but we're always willing to if we have the content to discuss.
Yeah, and which is a really good point. This isn't a marketing event for us. This is based
Mm-mm.
upon what we see from an academic standpoint, from a test content standpoint. I think you and I, in a perfect world, would do fewer of these because they take a lot of work, and we often make changes that are rather significant to the format. Not every time, but often. And so, in a perfect world, be like, look, the test is just consistent. Not much has changed. We don't have to do this. But when changes are afoot, we're going to be there. It's kind of like that reporter function that I'm starting to feel like. I feel like we're the reporters who have a lot of inside information from having studied this for so long. Other people don't have it, and it really becomes our obligation. Like if you see something going wrong or an abuse of the system, as a reporter, you should report that. And I feel that's kind of where the stage we've reached in terms of what we do. It's the same thing when all those problems were happening with the LSAT. I felt obligated to go out and tell people, look, that's not what's going to happen. They're probably going to do this, and try to lend some truth to the situation and end a little bit of the wrong-headed speculation that was at times cropping up.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So yeah, in a perfect world, we would do fewer of these. I think we can agree it's been anything but a perfect world lately. So we do more of them.
Yes, and on top of those 4 LSATs, John, you and I have got a lot of work to do with the LSAT Bibles courses because we are adding logic games and reading comprehension. It takes a lot of work, honestly, which isn't a complaint. It's just more of an observation of why it takes time for us to get through all of this. But the next one that's coming out is logic games. That should come out at some point in this spring. You and I are going to turn heavily towards that here in January.
Yeah.
And try to hammer that out relatively quickly. You feel good about it?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I feel good.
John's response to work. Do you feel good about doing work? Yeah, I'm okay with it.
Actually, I much prefer, what I would love to do is just shut everything off and do only that, because I really enjoy teaching. I love breaking these books down, explaining things that I know confound people, and we have the ability to kind of shine a light in novel ways. But of course, there's a January, a February, a March, and an April LSAT. So I know the reality of the system is that it's going to be a bit of a little column A, a little column B.
Yeah, it has to be. And of course, those of you who listen to the podcast know that recently the GRE has had some movement and probably will get a lot of traction in 2022. And so we'll see a much broader use of the GRE, I think, in the next admission cycle. Something we talked about recently and something that we see coming up. In tandem with that, our new GRE course, which is designed very much like our LSAT Bibles course, is going to be coming out later this year. Probably, I'd say early fall is about the time, right about the time that it would work out for the admissions process. And that means, at least from a GRE perspective, that no longer is there an LSAT preference. The schools can take either the LSAT or the GRE, and even if you have both scores, they can ignore one in favor of the other. So we think that'll open up the GRE usage, certainly in coming years, but it'll start next fall when we expect most, if not all, law schools to accept the GRE as the test of record for applications.
Yeah, this is going to give applicants options, and we're going to have an incredible course if you choose this alternative pathway.
Yeah, and if you're like, wait, what is that? Go back to one of our recent episodes. We talked about this, the re-rise of the GRE and it coming in. Got other things on the map too. We'll be coming out with an iPhone app finally in the next few months. That'll be a relatively basic app, but then later on this year, we'll kind of like next generation it. We'll be able to deliver a lot of our courses and course content in an integrated format, which I think will be really helpful. I kind of think about it as like Netflix. You can watch it on any device. That's the way I want our courses to be. And that's something that is on the horizon, part of those resources that we're obtaining and making access of.
Yeah, I'm thinking about how many people have my Netflix password. So maybe that's not a perfect analogy, but...
Yeah, they won't work that way
No.
From a security standpoint. That's something that we're definitely focused on. Mostly it's LSAC. They don't allow multiple users like that. And it does naturally work out with Prep Plus. But we'll talk about that later on when that stuff starts showing up on the horizon. Other than that, John, I think that's probably a pretty good look at the first portion of 2022 for PowerScore, as well as kind of like just an overview. What happened in the past year is, again, another crazy year.
Yeah. But I've seen so many positive student results over the past year, often in the face of adversity. So it's given me a lot of hope. It's given me a lot of encouragement too. And I think the next year is going to be even better.
Yeah, and I've been really fortunate to keep in contact with a lot of former students of ours who are in law school, and I've had some really great feedback on that. And it's always nice to find out, hey, I am enjoying law school and I am doing well, or I've graduated, and I'm starting to see that now. Because I've been on Twitter long enough that people who I helped like 4, 5, 6 years ago, they're out of law school, they're now practicing. And that's kind of cool to see as well. You can see them moving around, taking new jobs, what have you. So hopefully that'll continue. And, the whole goal of what we try to do here is to help people improve their outcomes. Get a better LSAT score, get a better admissions application, and turn that into scholarship money, financial aid, better results, better acceptances, pay less for law school, go to a better law school, and then hopefully have a better, longer, more lucrative career. That's kind of what we do. So when we see those outcomes, I have to say that it really is gratifying for me personally, because I've spent really my entire adult life helping people with the LSAT, as have you, John.
Yeah, it's one of the most fulfilling things I've ever done.
Although I'm not sure I would say you have had an adult life yet. You're certainly of adult age, but I wonder about the rest.
That's the nicest thing you've ever said to me.
I knew you'd like that.
Yeah, and we recorded it. Oh, yeah.
Nobody was ever harmed by a little banter. Any last comments here for episode 100, John?
No, it's been a good centennial and a pretty good 2021, all things considered. I feel like we accomplished as much as we could. And I think next year, like I said, is showing all signs of being even better. So I'm excited, man. Bring it on, 2022.
Yeah, it was a momentous year, and hopefully this next year will be even more momentous. And on that note, if you get a chance, please subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, or anywhere else you may find it. And if you've enjoyed it, please leave us a comment and a rating. And if you have any questions, for sure we'll be doing a mailbag in the next month or two, so please send those to us at lsatpodcast@powerscore.com. For the many people who have actually listened to all episodes, all 100, I say thank you and congratulations, because you've now gotten through 100, just like we've gotten through 100 as well. And for those of you who listened to all the episodes in 2021, thank you for that as well. We've got the New Year's coming up, John, so I want to wish everybody a happy New Year. Stay safe out there. Enjoy yourself. We will be back with the Crystal Ball in early January. I hope to see you there. Until then, take care.